Margaret Turner stepped into the grand luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue, her cane tapping softly against the polished marble floor. At 78 years old, she carried herself with grace, dressed in a simple yet elegant coat, her silver hair neatly styled. She had spent a lifetime building her success, but today, she was just another customer. Or so she thought. The moment she walked in, a young sales associate, Olivia, wrinkled her nose. She nudged her coworker. "Look at her," Olivia whispered. "I bet she's lost." Margaret noticed the hushed voices and dismissive stares, but she ignored them. She approached the jewelry counter, her sharp eyes scanning the sparkling displays. A manager, Stephanie, appeared, forcing a fake smile. "Ma'am, these pieces are quite exclusive. Perhaps something more affordable would be better for you?" Margaret's smile didn't waver. "I'd like to see that diamond necklace in the case, please." Stephanie sighed and hesitated before reluctantly unlocking the case. Olivia smirked. "That necklace costs more than most people make in a year. Are you sure you want to see it?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure." Stephanie exchanged a glance with Olivia, both barely hiding their amusement. "I'll get the security guard," Olivia muttered under her breath. As the women exchanged looks, a well-dressed customer entered, and the staff immediately shifted their attention. "Welcome, Mr. Reynolds. Let us know if you need anything," Stephanie gushed, ignoring Margaret. Margaret stood there, the insult sinking in. They thought she didn't belong here. But they had no idea who she really was. Margaret stood patiently by the jewelry counter, her fingers lightly tapping the glass as she observed the staff's behavior. It wasn't the first time she had been underestimated because of her age and appearance, but it never failed to amuse her how people made assumptions so quickly. Olivia and Stephanie were now fully engaged with Mr. Reynolds, a wealthy-looking man in an expensive suit. They laughed at his jokes, their tones dripping with fake politeness. Meanwhile, Margaret remained invisible. A young sales associate named Daniel, who had been quietly observing the exchange, shifted uncomfortably. Unlike his coworkers, he didn't judge customers by their looks. Something about the older woman intrigued him, there was a quiet confidence in her stance. Finally, Daniel stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am. Would you like to see the necklace?" His voice was kind, genuine. Stephanie shot him a sharp look. "Daniel, we have real customers to attend to," she snapped. Margaret turned to Daniel with a warm smile. "Yes, young man, I would love to see it." Ignoring his manager's disapproving glare, Daniel carefully pulled out the diamond necklace and placed it in Margaret's hands. She examined it with a knowing eye, nodding in approval. "It's beautiful," she said. "What's the clarity rating on this piece?" Daniel blinked in surprise. Not many casual shoppers knew such details. It's a VVS1, ma'am. Near flawless." Margaret smiled. "Good choice. Tell me, do you enjoy working here?" Daniel hesitated. "It's all right," he said carefully, sensing Stephanie's eyes burning into him. Margaret chuckled knowingly. "I see." Before the conversation could continue, Olivia loudly cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I think you've taken up enough of our time. If you're not buying, please don't waste our resources." Margaret sighed. "Oh, I intend to buy," she said calmly. Olivia scoffed. "Right." Margaret glanced at her watch. "In fact, I think it's time to call someone. I'd like to speak to the owner of this store." The room fell silent. Olivia and Stephanie exchanged looks of confusion before laughing. "Good luck with that," Stephanie sneered. "The owner doesn't meet with just anyone." Margaret simply smiled and pulled out her phone. Margaret calmly scrolled through her phone and tapped a number. She placed the call on speaker, her voice steady. "Hello, this is Margaret Ellis. I need you to send the store manager to the flagship location immediately." Olivia and Stephanie exchanged amused glances, suppressing their laughter. To them, this was just an old woman pretending to have connections. "Of course, Ms. Ellis." Right away, the voice on the other end responded with urgency. Daniel stiffened. "Ms. Ellis? Why did that name sound familiar?" Margaret ended the call and turned her gaze back to the stunned saleswomen. "Now, we wait." Olivia crossed her arms. "Nice act, lady. You really think we believe you're important enough to call the owner?" Margaret chuckled softly. "Oh, dear. You still don't understand, do you?" Before Olivia could reply, the store doors burst open. A sharply dressed man, in his early 50s, rushed inside. His face was slightly pale, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Margaret. "Ms. Ellis," he exclaimed, his voice filled with respect. I wasn't expecting you today." Silence fell over the store. Olivia and Stephanie's smirks vanished. Margaret smiled. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitman. I was hoping to shop in peace today, but it seems your employees had other plans." Mr. Whitman's face drained of color. His eyes flicked to Olivia and Stephanie, who now looked like they wanted to disappear. You know her?" Olivia stammered. "Know her?" Mr. Whitman turned to them, his tone sharp. "Margaret Ellis is the owner of this company. She built this entire luxury brand from the ground up." The color drained from Olivia and Stephanie's faces. Margaret let the words sink in before she spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "And now," she said, adjusting the necklace in her hands, "I believe we need to have a conversation about how my customers are treated in my own store." The room remained eerily silent. Olivia and Stephanie stood frozen, their arrogant smirks replaced with sheer panic. Mr. Whitman turned to Margaret, his forehead glistening with sweat. "Ms. Ellis, I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. If I had known you were coming—" Margaret held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "That's exactly the problem, Mr. Whitman. You shouldn't have to know I'm coming for your staff to treat me, or anyone else, with respect." Olivia's knees wobbled. "Ms. Ellis, I swear, we didn't know who you were," she blurted out, her voice desperate. Margaret tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "And what if I wasn't the owner? Would my treatment have been acceptable then?" Stephanie stammered, "And no, of course not. We were just following store policies." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Store policies?" She glanced at Mr. Whitman. "Does this store have a policy that says elderly black women can't browse without being treated like criminals?" Mr. Whitman paled further. "Absolutely not, Ms. Ellis. Our employees are trained to do exactly what they just did." Margaret finished for him, her voice calm but cutting. Olivia and Stephanie had no words left. They stood there, eyes darting between each other, silently pleading for a way out of this mess. Margaret sighed, setting down the expensive necklace she had been eyeing. "You see, I came here today not just to shop, but to experience firsthand how customers are treated in my store. And I must say, I'm incredibly disappointed." She turned back to Mr. Whitman. "I want a full review of how employees are trained. Effective immediately." Mr. Whitman nodded rapidly. "Of course, Ms. Ellis. Whatever you say." Margaret's gaze shifted back to the two women. "And as for you two, we'll have to discuss whether you deserve a place in my company." Olivia and Stephanie's faces turned ghostly white. Margaret glanced at her watch. "I'll expect a full report by tomorrow morning, Mr. Whitman." She turned to leave, her dignity and power firmly intact. And as she walked away, every employee in the store knew one thing for certain: things were about to change. Margaret strode toward the store's exit, but the heavy silence behind her made her pause. The employees stood frozen, their faces a mix of shock, fear, and realization. Customers, who had been silent witnesses, began murmuring among themselves. Some recorded on their phones, while others shook their heads at the shameful display they had just witnessed. Mr. Whitman rushed forward, his hands slightly trembling. "Ms. Ellis, please. Let's not be hasty. Olivia and Stephanie have been with us for years. Perhaps a warning." Margaret turned slowly, her expression unreadable. A warning? Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Stephanie, sensing an opening, clasped her hands together. "Yes, Ms. Ellis. We've been loyal employees. We work hard." Margaret folded her arms. "Tell me something, Stephanie. When I walked into this store, what did you see?" Stephanie hesitated. I saw someone who didn't look like our usual customers." Margaret nodded, her gaze unwavering. "And because of that, you assumed I didn't belong." Olivia swallowed hard. "It was a mistake, Ms. Ellis. We didn't mean to humiliate me?" Margaret finished for her. "Didn't mean to treat me as if I were less than the wealthy customers you roll out the red carpet for?" Both women had no response. Margaret sighed. "This is bigger than just me. How many others have walked in here and been treated the same way? How many customers have you pushed away because of your bias?" Mr. Whitman wiped his forehead. "I assure you, Ms. Ellis, we will implement better training." Margaret raised a hand to silence him. "Training? You think a seminar will fix years of ingrained prejudice?" She turned back to Olivia and Stephanie. "You don't just need training. You need to understand what real customer service looks like." She pointed to a well-dressed black man in the store. "Sir, may I ask, have you ever been treated unfairly in this store?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've felt unwelcome here before." Margaret's jaw tightened. "That's what I thought." She looked back at Mr. Whitman. "Effective immediately, Olivia and Stephanie will be reassigned to the stockroom." Their eyes widened. "The stockroom?" Olivia gasped. Margaret's expression was firm. "If they want to stay with this company, they'll have to learn what it means to work behind the scenes. No more front-end customer interactions until they can prove they deserve it." The weight of her words settled over the room. Margaret took a deep breath and glanced around the store. "Things will change. Starting today." And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a store that would never be the same again. Margaret stepped out of the store, but the impact of what had just happened was far from over. Unbeknownst to her, several customers had recorded the entire confrontation, capturing the moment she revealed her ownership and the employees' stunned reactions. Within hours, the videos began spreading across social media. "Old black lady gets humiliated in a luxury store, then shocks everyone." The caption alone drew thousands of views in minutes. The comment section exploded. "Imagine treating someone like that and then finding out they own the place. Karma at its finest. Ms. Ellis is a queen. This is why you treat everyone with respect. She handled it with such class. I'd have fired them on the spot." By the next morning, Margaret's assistant, Lisa, was frantically calling her. "Margaret, have you seen the internet today?" Lisa's voice was filled with excitement and urgency. Margaret, who had just finished her morning tea, raised an eyebrow. "No, why?" "Check your phone. You've gone viral. Everyone is talking about you." Margaret picked up her phone and clicked on one of the links Lisa had sent. She scrolled through the countless shares, comments, and news articles covering the incident. Even major news outlets had picked up the story. Luxury store owner schools her own staff after being racially profiled. Power move, woman humiliated in boutique reveals she owns it. Margaret shook her head, both amused and slightly overwhelmed. Well, this is unexpected. Lisa laughed. Unexpected? This is a PR goldmine. People are calling the store, asking if you'll be there. Some want to meet you, others just want to shop in a place where they know they'll be respected. Margaret sighed. And what about those employees? Lisa's tone became more serious. Stephanie and Olivia? They're panicking. Apparently, they're getting harassed online. Some people found their profiles, and, well, let's just say they're feeling the consequences of their actions. Margaret frowned. I never wanted them to be bullied. I just wanted them to learn. Lisa hesitated. So, what do you want to do? Margaret stared at the screen, watching as her story continued to spread. She knew this was an opportunity, not just for her store, but for a bigger conversation about respect, fairness, and change. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. Call a press conference, she said. It's time to set the record straight. Margaret stood in front of the podium, cameras flashing, microphones lined up, and reporters eager for her statement. The press conference had drawn an overwhelming crowd, journalists, customers, and even community leaders who admired her strength. The video of her humiliation and ultimate revelation had taken the internet by storm, and now, everyone wanted to hear from the woman at the center of it all. She adjusted the microphone and spoke with calm authority. I never expected to be here under these circumstances. When I walked into my own store that day, I wasn't looking for special treatment, I was just looking to shop, like any other customer. But what happened to me is something that happens to countless people every day, judged not by their character, but by their appearance. The crowd nodded, murmuring in agreement. This isn't just about me. This is about the way we treat people. It's about dignity, respect, and fairness. No one should have to prove their worth just to be treated with basic human decency. A reporter raised a hand. Ms. Ellis, are you planning to take action against the employees involved? Margaret paused, considering her words carefully. I've thought a lot about that. The internet has already judged them, and I don't condone the harassment they're receiving. However, there are consequences for their actions. She looked directly into the cameras. I will be making some serious changes at my company. We will be implementing new training, new policies, and ensuring that something like this never happens again. And as for those two employees, she took a deep breath. They will be given a choice, attend extensive sensitivity training and prove they've learned from this, or find employment elsewhere. The room filled with whispers. Some expected her to fire them on the spot, but Margaret had a different approach, one that valued growth over revenge. Another reporter spoke up. What do you hope will come from all of this? Margaret smiled. I hope this serves as a reminder. You never know who you're talking to. More importantly, you never know what someone has been through. Treat everyone with respect, because kindness costs nothing, but the price of discrimination can be steep. As she stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupted into applause. This moment wasn't just about her, it was about sending a message that could change the way people think, act, and treat each other. But Margaret knew this wasn't the end. There was still work to be done. The day after the press conference, Margaret arrived at the luxury store with her legal team. The store's regional manager, Mr. Calloway, was already waiting, sweating under the pressure of media scrutiny. He knew what was coming. Ms. Ellis, he began, but Margaret held up a hand. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Calloway. I've made my decision, she said firmly. The store's employees stood in a tense semicircle, including Sarah and Linda, the two women who had humiliated her. Their faces were pale, eyes darting between Margaret and their manager. As of today, this store will undergo a complete restructuring, Margaret announced, her voice calm but authoritative. Effective immediately, Mr. Calloway, you are relieved of your duties. Gasps filled the room. Calloway's mouth fell open. But, Ms. Ellis, I've been here for 10 years. I've helped this store thrive. Margaret's expression remained neutral. And yet, in those 10 years, this kind of discrimination has gone unchecked. It happened to me, which means it's likely happened to many others. That is unacceptable. Calloway turned red with embarrassment and anger but knew he had no argument. Security escorted him out as murmurs filled the air. Margaret turned to Sarah and Linda. I could fire you both on the spot, she said, making them flinch. But I believe in second chances. You have a choice, take mandatory sensitivity and diversity training, or leave. Sarah hesitated, then stammered, I want to learn. I never meant. No excuses, Margaret interrupted. Actions speak louder than words. If you want to stay, you need to prove you can treat every customer with the dignity they deserve. Linda, still shaken, nodded silently. Margaret surveyed the rest of the employees. For those of you who stood by and said nothing, let this be a lesson. Silence in the face of injustice is just as harmful as the act itself. A few employees looked down in shame. Now, Margaret continued, this store will be rebranded. New policies. New management. A place where anyone, regardless of background, feels valued and respected. She turned on her heel, heading toward the exit. The staff stood frozen, realizing that the store they once knew was about to change, forever. As Margaret exited the store, she was met with a wave of reporters eager for a statement. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in her direction, and voices overlapped with questions. Ms. Ellis, how does it feel to take control of the store that humiliated you? One journalist asked. Margaret gave a calm, measured smile. It's not about control, she said. It's about change. This isn't just about me, it's about ensuring that no customer is ever treated as less than based on assumptions. The crowd murmured in agreement, and the journalists scrambled to take notes. But why not just fire everyone involved? Another reporter questioned. Margaret sighed. Because education is more powerful than punishment. If I fire them, they'll go somewhere else and likely carry the same biases. But if I educate them, I give them a chance to grow. True change happens when people understand the harm they've caused and commit to doing better. The response sent a ripple through the crowd. Some nodded in admiration, others furiously typed her words into their articles. As Margaret made her way to her car, her assistant, Rachel, walked alongside her. The board wants to meet about your changes. Some shareholders are concerned about the media attention. Margaret chuckled. They should be more concerned about losing loyal customers due to discrimination. Rachel smirked. That's exactly what I told them. Margaret glanced back at the store. The place where she had once been humiliated was now under her leadership. It was poetic justice, but she wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing it for every person who had been made to feel unworthy in places like this. Schedule the meeting, Margaret said. I have a vision, and it's time they see it. As she stepped into her car, she knew the real work was just beginning. Margaret walked into the luxury store's conference room, where the board of directors was already waiting. The air was tense. Some members exchanged wary glances, unsure of what her leadership meant for them. Ms. Ellis, one of the older board members, Mr. Whitmore, began. We respect your authority as the owner, but this store has had a certain clientele for decades. Your recent decision to go public with your experience has stirred controversy. Margaret remained calm, folding her hands on the table. What stirred controversy was the way I was treated. The fact that it became a viral moment tells us that discrimination is still alive in places like this. I refuse to let my store be known for that. Another board member, a younger woman named Jenna, nodded in agreement. Honestly, Margaret has a point. Customers are more socially conscious now. If we don't adapt, we'll lose them. Whitmore scoffed. And what do you propose? Fire everyone? Margaret shook her head. I'm proposing a complete cultural shift. A new training program focusing on customer service, diversity, and inclusion. Every employee, from the clerks to the managers, will participate. Murmurs broke out around the table. Some members seemed intrigued, others skeptical. And what if they refuse? Another board member asked. Margaret's expression hardened. Then they'll be replaced. This store is a luxury brand, and true luxury isn't just about wealth, it's about experience. If our customers don't feel valued, they won't return. And I won't let that happen. Silence filled the room. Jenna finally spoke, breaking the tension. I think she's right. This isn't just about optics. It's about the future. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Exactly. And I intend to make this store a place where everyone, regardless of their background, is treated with respect. The board members exchanged looks. Change was coming, and they knew it. Margaret wasted no time implementing her vision. Within days, she arranged a mandatory training session for all employees. The store's grand hall, usually filled with displays of high-end merchandise, was transformed into a training space. Employees sat in rows, some eager, others skeptical. A well-known corporate consultant took the stage. Luxury isn't just about price tags, it's about how customers feel when they walk through the door, he began. Exclusivity should never mean exclusion. Some employees, like Jenna, nodded in agreement. But others, like Carla, the sales associate who had humiliated Margaret, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Margaret stood up and took the microphone. I built this company from the ground up. It stands for elegance, excellence, and inclusivity. I refuse to let it become a place of discrimination. She scanned the room. You don't have to like every customer. But you will respect them. A hesitant hand rose. It was Carla. Ms. Ellis, I want to apologize. I let my biases get the best of me. I assumed, and I was wrong. Margaret studied her for a moment before nodding. Acknowledging the problem is the first step. What you do next is what matters. By the end of the training, something had shifted. Employees who once saw diversity training as unnecessary now understood its importance. The final part of the transformation was unveiled the next day. Margaret introduced a new store policy, personalized luxury for every customer. No more assumptions, no more profiling. Every visitor would receive a high-end experience, no exceptions. As the employees left for the day, Margaret smiled. The change was happening, and soon, the world would see it. A week after the new policies were implemented, Margaret walked into the store, observing the changes firsthand. The atmosphere felt different, warmer, more welcoming. Sales associates greeted every customer with a smile, offering assistance without judgment. The once unspoken rules of exclusivity had been rewritten. She spotted Carla at the front, attentively assisting an elderly black woman picking out a handbag. Margaret watched as Carla patiently explained the differences in leather quality and craftsmanship, her tone respectful and professional. It was a stark contrast from their first encounter. As Margaret moved deeper into the store, she noticed a new customer admiring a diamond necklace. It was a young black woman dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse. In the past, an associate might have ignored her or assumed she wasn't a serious buyer. But now, an employee approached with enthusiasm, treating her with the same attentiveness they would any high-profile client. Margaret's heart swelled with pride. This was the vision she had always wanted for her brand. A place where luxury was defined by experience, not assumptions. Later that afternoon, Margaret held a meeting with her executive team. Our sales have increased by 12% since implementing the new approach, one of the managers reported. Customers are leaving better reviews, and we're seeing more repeat visits. Margaret nodded. People don't just buy products, they buy experiences. And when they feel respected, they come back. As she walked out of the store that evening, she paused at the entrance, looking up at the gleaming gold letters that spelled out the company's name, Ellis Company. This wasn't just a luxury brand. It was a legacy. And now, it stood for something far greater than wealth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives. Let us know in the comments, have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination like this? How did you handle it? Remember, kindness and respect cost nothing but mean everything. Let's make the world a more inclusive place, one story at a time.